Elaborate. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Nama tuh. What about audio and video? Is there? Are they okay? Thank you. Okay, Putya. Good afternoon. We can continue today's lesson, and now we are going to start our second lesson. Initially, we have discussed about vectors. Now, we are going to start the second lesson of linear motion. The second lesson of linear motion, right topic, graphs. Graphs. Graph. In linear motion, we have discussed about how to represent a linear motion. How to represent a linear motion. In that case, there are three factors to be considered when representing a linear motion. What are those three factors? The current position, the moving direction, and the way of moving. The current position, the moving direction, and way of moving with it. Okay. So accordingly, there are two methods of representing a linear motion. One is a graphical representation. What is a geometrical representation? Using a line segment with some object. Then, now the second representation is graphical representation. That means using a graph. So actually, Pute, we have discussed about motion graphs, but here I'm going to discuss about graph as a common knowledge, Pute, because that knowledge is valid for every graph in physics. Then you actually it will be very easy to understand each and every graph in physics. Okay. Okay. Graphs. Then another topic, graphs. So what is a graph? What is a graph? What is a graph actually? What is a graph? Can you give me an answer? What is a graph? What is a graph? Graph actually. With any graph, we can just simply actually we can have a simple definition. Simple definition means simple understanding about a graph. Actually, graph means it is something like a drawing. It is something like drawing on Cartesian coordinate. It is something like a drawing on the Cartesian coordinate. Actually, this drawing is drawn on the Cartesian coordinate. It is just a drawing. It is just a simple drawing on Cartesian coordinate. And okay. Then, how to draw a graph? How to draw a graph? Graph can go. Okay. So, as I mentioned earlier, graph is a simple drawing on the Cartesian coordinate. So, you know this is the Cartesian coordinate. X and Y are two axes and two axes. Okay, so this is called the graph. But usually the x-axis represents the independent variable. I will let you know what is the meaning of that. This is the independent variable. Independent. This is a dependent variable. What is the meaning of that one? Independent and dependent variable. Pute, as you know in your oral syllabus, actually you have drawn some graphs in mathematics. No, actually you know you have drawn y equal mx plus c graph. Then what is y equal ax squared plus bx plus c graph. Okay. You have drawn a linear graph as well as a quadratic function. Okay. So, Puti, if you consider about this kind of relationship, Puti, actually this kind of relationship is plotted on Cartesian coordinate. This is a relationship, Puti. This is a relationship. This relationship can be plotted on Cartesian coordinate. And so definitely we have to have a relationship. We have to have a relationship between two variables to draw a graph. Variables means those are not constant value. Maybe they can have constant values today. But variable means that value can be changed. That means the value of x can be changed as well as value of y can be changed. That's why we call them as variables. Then to draw a graph, you should have this kind of relationship. I don't know whether it is a linear relationship or quadratic relationship or any other relationship. It may be any other relationship with it, but I don't care. And but remember, to draw a graph, definitely there should be a relationship between two variables. And sometimes those variables may be time and displacement. When time varies, displacement also varies. Then we can have a relationship between time and displacement. Then that relationship can be plotted on a graph. Sometimes this relationship may be in between time and energy, or time and temperature, or temperature versus energy. That relationship between the relationship may be any relationship, and the relationship this relationship may be any relationship. But remember, when you are building a relationship, definitely when you are building a relationship to draw a graph, definitely there should be two variables. One out of two variable, it can be changed. It can be changed by us. According to change in that variable, the second variable will be varied. That means we cannot change the second variable directly. we can change only the first variable. According to the relationship between first and second variable, once we change the first variable, second variable also change. Okay. Suppose this kind of thing. Suppose the temperature and energy. Now there is a relationship between temperature and energy. Temperature and energy. That means if we give a heat energy, the temperature of object can be increased. And that means, Puti, we can change the amount of heat associated with that object. Once we change the heat, once we change that energy, the temperature of object that also changes, Puti, due to the change in that energy, Puti. And therefore, when we are building a relationship like this, actually there should be two variables. One out of those two variables can be changed. That means we can change it. According to the change in that variable, the second variable varies. We cannot change the second variable directly. Okay, Pratik? Like this. We cannot change the temperature of that object, Pratik. We cannot change. If you want to change, you have to give heat energy or you have to remove heat energy from that object. Okay? If you watch my heat lessons, then you can understand very easily what I'm saying. If you want to increase or if you want to decrease the temperature, you have to give heat energy or you have to remove heat energy from an object. Otherwise, there is no way to change the temperature. And therefore, definitely, temperature depends on heat energy. And like that. Actually, we can remove temperature. So we can remove heat energy. We can give heat energy. But we cannot touch temperature. And therefore, when we are building a graphical relationship, there are two variables. One variable, we can change one variable. According to change in that variable, second variable changes. That first variable is called independent variable. That means we can change it without depending any other factors. We can change it without depending on any other factors. Therefore, we call it as independent variable. It does not depend on any other. But what is the second variable? It changes its value according to the change in first variable. That means that variable depends on the first one. Therefore, such kind of variables are called dependent variable. Is that clear? If it is clear, please raise there. Everyone on the side. Therefore, as a general standard, independent variable is represented by x-axis while the dependent variable is represented by the y-axis. Therefore, you can change x. According to change in x, the y-axis varies. Varies. Is that clear? Clear? Yeah. May Raghav draw this one? Draw this one, okay? May I write this one? May I write this one? The graph is a drawing on a Cartesian coordinate. To draw a graph, there should be a graphical relationship between two variables. There should be a graphical relationship. To draw a graph, come on. There should be a graphical relationship between two variables. One out of those two variables can be changed. One out of those two variables can be changed. it does not depend, it does not depend on any other factor. It does not depend on any other factor. Therefore, it is called the independent variable. Therefore, it is called the independent variable. Right in the para. According to the change in independent variable, according to the changes in independent variable, according to the changes in independent variable, the values of the second variable, the values of the second variable, the values of second variable varies. Therefore, it is called the dependent variable. Therefore, it is called the dependent variable. Write it in the better. As a general rule, as a general rule, the independent variable, the independent variable is represented by the x-axis. The independent variable is represented by the x-axis. The x-axis, while the dependent variable is represented by the y-axis. The independent variable is represented by x-axis, while the dependent variable is represented by the y-axis. Then, I don't know. Factors to be considered when drawing a graph. Factors to be considered when drawing a graph. What are the factors? You know, as I mentioned you earlier, a graph means that is a simply we can define it as a drawing on a Cartesian coordinate. Drawing on a Cartesian coordinate. Therefore, if it is a drawing, the first thing you have to consider is the location. The location where you going to draw this drawing. The location, Puti. And actually, there are four spaces. No, there are four spaces. The first thing you have to decide what is the space that you are going to use. Normally, one space is called as a quadrant. Quadrant. This is the first quadrant, second one, third one, and fourth one. Therefore, the first thing you have to determine what is the quadrant that the graph is belongs to. එහෙනම් ඒක තමයි මුලින්ම කරන්න ඕන. Number one, this is the first quadrant. So once you can decide the location, Puti, or once you can decide what is the quadrant, then you can select one quadrant. Once you can determine the quadrant, then you have to worry about the shape. Neither. First thing you have to determine the location, Puti. The location where you're going to draw the graph. The second thing you have to worry, the shape. So if you know the place as well as the shape, place and shape. If you know the place and shape, then you can draw the graph. That's all. එච්චරයි බොහොම හරි ලේසි උදේ මේක. ඔයා මේක logically arrange කරගත්තොත්, if you can arrange this one logically, it is very easy to sort out. And therefore, graph is a drawing drawn on the Cartesian coordinate. Then there are two things to be considered when drawing a graph. The first thing is determine the location. Then determine the shape. Determine the shape. And there are the factors to be considered when drawing a graph. Then the first factor, determining the location, determining the location within the brackets quadrants. Determine the location within the brackets quadrants. determine the location of coordinates where the graph is going to be plotted. Where the graph is going to be plotted. Okay, make an example. Parameter. Then how to determine the location? How to determine the coordinate? Now, the first thing is to determine the coordinate. So how to determine that thing? Tell me. How to determine the coordinate? How to determine the coordinate? We can determine the quadrant by the positive or negativeness of x and y coordinate. Positive or negativeness of x and y coordinate. If we consider about first one, it is very clear both x positive, y positive. They are not positive. If we consider about second one, it is very clear y positive but x is negative. And y positive but x negative. If it is considered a third one, both x and y both are negative. If we consider fourth quadrant, x is positive but y is negative. X is positive but y negative. Therefore, you can determine the appropriate quadrant using the points. Points means coordinates. Using the coordinates. Using the sign of coordinates. And then, therefore, the location can be determined by the sign of x and y coordinates. Is that clear? If you got that thing, please raise the hand. Okay, they write this one. They write this one and write out this. Therefore, yeah. Ah, then, ah, now you can determine the location. That is very easy. You have to determine the positive or negativeness of x and y only. X and y only. Ah, then, once you determine the location, you have to determine the shape because we cannot draw arbitrary shapes. Actually, we have to determine the shape. Now tell me how to determine the shape. How to determine the shape? Hmm, hmm. Putih, the shape of a graph. That hakan making the because the shape of the graph is decided by the gradient. The gradient, Putih. Now we can understand and now we can define what is a gradient and the application of gradient, Putih. But until then, You have to remember this thing. The shape is decided by the gradient. The gradient. Okay, there's a second thing. The second thing, write down this thing. The shape of the graph is decided by the shape of the graph is decided by the shape of the graph is decided by the gradient of the graph, the gradient of the graph. Okay. There are a topic. The gradient of a graph. The gradient of a graph. The gradient the gradient of a graph. Kira katakan. Okay. Now we can understand, we have to understand what is the gradient. This is very, very important thing. Please listen to me very careful. Okay. පොඩ්ඩක් උඩ පැනලා නටලා එන්න මේ හොඳට අහගෙන ඉන්න. Okay. Look at this one. Puti, gradient of a graph. The gradient of a graph changes from point to point. It's changed from point to point. That means the gradient at this point may vary from the gradient at this point. Therefore, point to point gradient may vary. Sometimes it may not be vary, but sometimes it may vary. Therefore, we have to define the gradient for a particular point. That thing should be understood first. The gradient varies from point to point. Therefore, we have to define the gradient for a particular point. Is that clear? Clear? If it is clear, please raise the hand. If it is clear, please raise the hand. Thank you. Okay. Now gradient varies from point to point. Now we can understand how to define the gradient for a particular point. So if you want to determine the gradient for a particular point, you have to draw a tangent. You have to draw a tangent to the graph at that point. So this is the tangent to the graph. Tangent to the graph at point P. Tangent to the graph at point P. Tangent to the graph at point P. The first thing you have to determine where you want to find the gradient. So then you have to draw a graph. So you draw a tangent to the graph at that particular point. And that tangent should be extended until it touches the x-axis. You have to extend the thing up to the x-axis. So once you extend this tangent up to the x-axis, so this is the intersection point, Pute. This is the intersection point. So with respect to this point, the right-hand side is called positive x direction. The left-hand side, with respect to this point, the left-hand side is called the negative x direction. Okay. Actually, it doesn't mean where the location is put here. You have to take the intersection point. The right-hand side from the intersection point is called the positive x direction. I have many right-hand side the positive. Therefore, right-hand side is called the positive x direction, and left-hand side is called the negative x direction. Is that clear? Is that clear? If it is clear, please raise the hand. Then you have to take the angle. You have to take the angle between the tangent and the positive x direction. Therefore, this is the angle. The angle between the tangent and the positive x direction. Positive x direction. And then the tan value the tan value of that angle is called the tangent. So that is called the gradient at that particular point. Therefore, gradient is defined. The gradient is defined as the tan value, of the angle between the positive x direction and the tangent at the tangent which is drawn to the graph at the particular point. Okay. How about it? Medidagan. Right then. Therefore, the gradient if you get this one, please trace that. තේරුණා තුසන මේක. tangent එක මොකක්ද කියන එක තේරෙනවද? tangent නෙවෙයි. gradient එක. Thank you, very good. Tangent tan value. Tan value. Tan value. Tangent tan value. Tan value. Tangent. I finish. Now, okay. Let's do the set. Do some examples today. Suppose you want to determine the tan value at this point, then you have to draw a tangent to the graph at that point. You have to draw tangent to the graph at that point. Okay. Then it should be extended up to x-axis. So once you determine the intersection point, the right hand side is the positive direction, left hand side is the negative direction, negative x direction. Therefore, here, now you can determine the angle. Therefore, MP means gradient of P is equal tan theta. Tan theta. There is another example. What if you want to measure the tangent at this, gradient at this point, again you have to draw a tangent to the graph at that point. Then take the intersection point put in. Now the right hand side is a positive x direction. Maybe the positive x direction. So you have to take the angle between the positive x direction and the tangent. Then gradient of P is equal to tan theta. Ano tayo kasample mo? Suppose you want to measure the tangents with want to measure the gradient at this point. Then again, we have to draw tangent. We have to draw tangent first. We have to draw tangent to the graph at that point. Then take the intersection point with x. So this is the intersection point. Then here, this is the positive x direction. Put a This one is the negative x direction. Therefore, the angle between the positive x direction and the gradient is theta. Now it is an obtuse angle. It is an obtuse angle. Therefore, MP is equal to tan theta. Here tan theta is obtuse angle. Variable. Then draw a tangent to the graph. Draw a tangent to the graph at this point. Now, this is the intersection point. Therefore, the right hand direction is the positive x direction. Therefore, this is the positive x direction. Therefore, this is the angle between the positive x direction and the tangent. Positive x direction and tangent. This is also an obtuse angle. This is also an obtuse angle. Therefore, MP is equal to. If you got that from please raise the hand. Teo nono tussa. Hadlena tussa. Now it is very clear, Putibane. Now it is very clear according to the value of tan theta. Right? According to the value of tan theta, the shape of the graph, the shape of the graph varies. The shape of the graph varies. Therefore, according to the value of tan theta, the shape of the graph varies, Puti. Therefore, the shape depends on the gradient, the variation in gradient, Puti. So if you can understand what is the variation, then you can easily plot the graph. Or if you want to analyze a plotted graph, then you have to have very good understanding about the variation in gradient. Right. Okay. Again, and so it is very clear. So, comma, it is very clear. It is very clear. When the gradient changes, when the gradient changes, the shape of the graph also changes. The shape of the graph also changes. Shape of the graph also changes. Now, as we discussed earlier, the location of the graph can be determined by the positive or negativeness of y and x. And now, then the shape can be determined by the variation in gradient. What is this variation? What is this variation? You have to understand that thing. You have to understand that thing. Pute, the variation of gradient can be discussed in two aspects, two criteria. Okay. The variation in gradient you have to discuss. You have to discuss the variation in gradient under two criteria. What are those criteria? topic? The variation in gradient. The variation in gradient. To decide the exact shape of the graph, to decide the exact shape of the graph, to decide the exact shape of the graph, we should determine the variation in gradient. We should determine the variation in gradient. We should determine the variation in gradient. The variation in gradient can be discussed under two criteria. The variation in gradient can be discussed under two criteria. First one is positive or negativeness of the gradient. The second criteria is variation with x. X gradient. What will happen to the gradient when x increases? When x increases, whether the gradient increases, decreases, or constant. Constant. Get that. When x increases, with the gradient increases, decreases for constant. Therefore, you have to have very good understanding, or you have to have very good knowledge how to identify the positive or negativeness of gradient and how to determine the variation in gradient with x. When x increases, whether the gradient increases or decreases, or and if it is a constant. So you should understand that thing. Then write the next topic. And the next topic, determining the positive or negativeness of a gradient. Determining the positive or negative. Determining positive or negativeness of a gradient. Please listen to this very carefully. So you know what is the gradient for the what is the gradient? Gradient is a tan value. Gradient is a tan value. So if gradient is positive, tan value should be positive. If gradient is negative, the tan value should be negative. Okay. On the other hand, when tan theta is positive, gradient is positive. When tan theta is negative, the gradient is negative. And that means when tan theta is positive, then the gradient is positive. Tan theta is negative, then the gradient is negative. The gradient is negative. Is that clear? If it is clear, please raise the hand. Thank you. Thank you very much. Now this is about tan theta. This is about tan theta. This is about tan theta. You know the gradient means actually gradient means tan theta. Actually, can you tell me what is the range of theta? What is the range of theta? Range of theta? Theta के तीन range का बताती. ये theta की range का बताती. What is the range of theta? Yes, very good. Very good, Adafa. The gradient range is 0 to 180. 0 to 180 because actually this is the angle between two straight line. No, this is the angle between two straight line. The angle between two straight line is in between 0 to 180. 0 to 180. Therefore, the range of theta. The range of theta is 0 to 180 as it is an angle between two straight lines. So I can divide this thing into two segments. One is acute angle section and other one is obtuse angle section. Because the range is 0 to 180. 0 to 180. Therefore, I can divide this one into two sections. Therefore, theta can be divided into two sections, acute section and obtuse section. Acute means 0 to theta is lesser than 90. Theta is lesser than 90. Here theta is higher than 90. When theta equals to 90, then it will be another case. This is theta lesser than 90. This is theta higher than 90. So when theta is lesser than 90, can you tell me what is the sign of tan value? What is the sign of tan value? When theta is lesser than 90, what is the sign of tan value? We have an acute angle like now. If it is an acute angle, what is the sign of tan value? Yes, that is positive. That is positive. You know, okay. If you consider about angles, when the angle is 0 to 90, all the trigonometric ratios are positive. If the angle is 90 to 180, only sign is positive. If it is 180 to 270, only tan is positive. If it is 270 to 360, only cos is positive. Therefore, this is 0 to 90, 90 to 180, 180 to 270, 270 to 360. And that means if angle is an acute angle, if this angle is an acute angle, okay, tan theta is positive. Tan theta is positive. If this angle is obtuse angle, if this angle is an obtuse angle, then what will happen? If this angle is obtuse angle, what is the sign of tan value? Again, if this angle is obtuse angle, What is the sign of tan value? Yes, it is negative, Pute. Therefore, if it is an acute angle, tan theta is positive. If this one is in obtuse angle, tan theta is negative. Negative. You can take this one using this figure. Hardly. If you get that one, please raise then teno natusan. Teno natusan. Therefore, finally we can conclude this thing. Therefore, we can finally conclude this thing. Therefore, if theta is an acute angle, if theta is an acute angle, then M positive. Gradient is positive. If it is acute angle, gradient is positive. If it is a negative obtuse angle, then gradient is negative. Then the gradient is negative. This is my final conclusion. Therefore, you have to draw the graph and determine whether the angle is obtuse or acute. If it is an acute angle, then the gradient is positive. If it is an obtuse angle, then the gradient is negative. If you got my argument, please raise the hand. තේරුණා නේද උස්සන්නේ? පැහැදිලි නේද උස්සන්නේ? Thank you. වැඩක් කරලා. Okay. Then do this exercise. Then do this exercise. Determine the positive or negativeness of gradient of the following graphs. Determine the positive or negativeness of the gradient of the following graphs. Determine the positive or negativeness of the gradient of the following graphs. ටග් ගාලා බලන්නද? ටග් ගාලා බලන්න මේ මොකද්ද gradient එක positive negative කියලා. හරිද? වැඩේ ඉවර නේද අදස්සන්? වැඩේ finish now. Very good. හරි. හරිද? බලමු. So we just need to draw tangent. Draw tangent to this graph. Draw tangent to this graph. Now determine whether this angle is an acute or obtuse. Now tell me whether this angle is acute or obtuse. ටග් ගාලා කියන්න. Whether this angle is acute or obtuse. Acute or obtuse. Acute. Yes, acute. Then Yes, very good. Now tell me, what is the sign of gradient? What is the sign of gradient? Positive or negative? What is the sign of gradient? Yes, very good, Tata, very good. Therefore, here M is positive, Puti. M is positive. If you got this one, if you got this answer, please raise the hand. मैं आंसर करते करते तुझसे मैं आंसर करते करते तुझसे very good, very good. هذا بتتين ماذا سارة then this one again you have to determine, you have to draw the tangent. Actually now this is a straight line, no? So if you draw tangent, it will be a straight line too. Take a straight line. Now if you determine this angle, what is the angle? Again, it is an acute angle. It is an acute angle. Okay, it is an acute angle. Yes. Therefore, the here M is positive. Then this one. Draw tangent to the graph. So also draw tangent to the graph. Now it is very clear. This angle is acute. This angle is acute, less than 90. Therefore, M is positive. If you got these three answers, please raise the hand. May answers to sir. Taggal. Very good, Sandeepa. Mustafa, very good. Thank you, Muti. Alright. Now you have to draw tangent to there. So once you draw tangent, then you can determine this angle. Now it is very clear this angle is higher than 90. This angle is higher than 90. Therefore, the theta is higher than 90. Therefore, gradient should be negative. The gradient should be negative. If you got that one, please raise the hand. Table to Sunny. May I answer get to Sun? Puti me shapes are the me shapes are the graphs of the negative angle me shapes are the therefore if you can understand these six shapes additional special cases have I make case I understand current Pulwana on graph Maheka monkey muling over to gun and graph. Muling over to gun and graph, eat a passive with a motion graph. So, eat a passive around the catine. Then what? Yes, sir. So, if you draw tangent to a straight line, the tangent will be the straight line. Anyway, if you draw tangent to a straight line, then it will be the straight line. Therefore, you need to extend the straight line only. So, once you extend the straight line, then it creates an obtuse angle with the positive x direction. Therefore, here theta is higher than 90. Therefore, gradient is negative. Gradient is negative. Now look at this one. Again, draw tangent. Draw tangent. If you don't draw tangent, it is very clear. This theta is higher than 90. Therefore, gradient should be negative. The gradient should be negative. If you got all these answers, please raise the hand. Very good, very good. Best. Yeah. Theta less than 90. Theta less than 90. Theta less than 9. Okay, now I give you a very small shortcut to understand whether the gradient is positive or negative. මං කියවනේ මේ shape සහ විතරයි තියෙන්නේ කියලා. ඔයාලට මොන graph එකක් ආවත් මේ shape සහ විතරමයි තියෙන්නේ. වෙන දෙයක් ඇත්තේ නැහැ, වෙන කරන්න දෙයක් නැහැ. මෙවුම තමයි දින්නේ. මේ shape සහ එහෙම ඒ කියන්නේ මොන විදිහට ඇඳලා ඔය shape සහ එහෙම තමයි කැලි කැලි තියෙන්නේ. හරි. Therefore, I can give you a very short method to understand whether the gradient is positive or not. Look at this one. Look at the upper three graphs. Look at the upper three graphs. බලන්න මොකද වෙලා තියෙන්නේ? ඊවලනේ. Green. If you observe the upper three graphs, it is very clear they are increasing graph. They are increasing graphs. If you observe the second row, it is very clear they are decreasing. They are increasing. So that means if the graph is increasing then the gradient of that part is positive. The gradient of that part is positive. If the graph is decreasing, the gradient of that part is negative. That is very easy. No need to draw the tangent and determine whether the angle is acute or obtuse. You can determine whether the graph is increasing or decreasing. If the graph is increasing, gradient is positive. If the graph is decreasing, the gradient of that portion is negative. If you got my explanation, please raise the hand. තේරෙනවද තුස්සන්? එහෙනම් බොහොම ලේසි පුතේ දැන් ඔයාලට ඒක කියන්න. එකට ආගන්න. Therefore, මෙන්න මේක කොටු කරගන්න දාලා gradient is positive. If the graph is decreasing, then gradient is negative. The gradient is negative. Therefore, I can draw these three sets. Today. No matter where the coordinate is, this is the first set. This is the first set. Okay? So this is the second set. Therefore, this one is increasing. Those graphs are increasing. And the shape එක මොකක් වුණත් බලන්න. අනිත් shape එක මොකක් වුණත් මේක increase වෙනවා. Okay? This one is increasing. This one is also increasing. And therefore, when we increase it, Increasing graphs, that means M is positive. Okay, those are decreasing graphs. Those are decreasing graphs, Puti. Therefore, M is negative. තේරියම් නම් අත උස්සන්න. පැහැදිලිද? Thank you. Thank you, Puti. Okay, you're right. Okay, have I finished with it? Have. Okay. So this is the way of determining the positive or negativeness. This is the way of determining the positive or negativeness of gradient. And uh, then we have to understand how to determine the variation of gradient with x. That means when x is increasing, what will happen to the gradient? Whether it is increasing, decreasing, or constant. Okay, okay. So that part can be determined. That part may be discussed in our next class. Most of the case we can start our next class from 5:30 a.m. onwards as a full day class. 5:30 a.m. to 10:30 p.m. If there's no issue with it, WhatsApp issue එකක් ආවෙ නැත්නම් මම ඒක තමයි plan එකක් මේ මොකද මොකක් හරි ආවෙ නැත්නම් මොකද මේ අතරම මේ සතියේ මම එහෙම 5:30 ඉඳන් 10:30 දක්වා කරන්න හිතන් හිටියේ ඒ වුණාට මේ මම ගිය අඟහරුවාදා හවස නෙමෙයි බදාදා උදේ ගියට පස්සේ අන්තිමට මේ සිකුරාදා උදේ තමයි ජොබ් එකෙන් ආවේ එළියට පැය 48ක් එක දිගට වැඩ ඊට පස්සේ ආයි සිකුරාදා රායි ගිහිල්ලා ආයෙ සෙනසුරාදා උදේ වරුවේ ආව බලංගොඩ ගිහිල්ලා ඔකත් එක්ක මට තමයි අද උදේ 5:00ට පටන් ගන්න උනේ නැත්තේ. මේ මොකද්ද? එහෙම නුනුනේ නැත්නම් මොකක්වත් කේස් එකක් ආයේ නැත්තොත් අනිවාර්යෙන් 5:30 පටන් ගන්න 5:30 ඉඳන් 10:30 දක්වා යනවා. ඒ නිසා next week එකේ class එකේ අපි ගොඩාක් ටිකක් cover කරන්න බලාපොරොත්තුවක් තියෙනවා. Especially linear motion part as well as force equilibrium part. Okay. So we are actually we hope to start force equilibrium part as well as we have to discuss today's papers. Actually we did three papers today. One is unit exam, other one is based on vector MCQ paper. The other third one is based on vector essay paper. Okay. Therefore, those who miss those lessons, please go through the recordings. Those are very, very important recordings because the mathematical part in that lesson is very important. Is very important. Therefore, please go through those recordings and do the questions again. Actually, I received a few papers in last essay paper. I received a few answer sheets for last essay paper, but not all. So once you finish answering, please send that to me because I need to mark your answers. හරිද? අනිවාර්යෙන් මාක් කරන්න ඕනේ මට ඔයගොල්ලන්ගේ answers මට ඔයගොල්ලෝ මොන level එකේ ඉන්නවද කියලා බලා ගන්න ඕනේ. ඒ නිසා අනිවාර්යෙන් එවන්න. ඒක එවන්න නැතුව ඉන්න එපා. මොකද ඔයගොල්ලෝ හැංගිලා හිටිය කියලා වැඩක් නැහැ. මොකද අන්තිමට exam එක දැන් ඔයගොල්ලෝ දැන් මොකක් හරි වැරද්දක් තියෙනවා මගෙත් එක්ක discuss කරලා හදාගන්න ඕනේ. හරිද? මොකද මේක ඕපන් දාන්නෙත් නැහැ මට පර්සනල් level නිසා මම පර්සනල් තමයි හැමෝටම ඉන්ස්ට්‍රක්ෂන්ස් දෙන්නේ. කාටවත් එතකොට දැනගන්න හම්බ වෙන්නේ නැහැ. ඔයාලට ඉන්ස්ට්‍රක්ෂන් එකක් දුන්නද නැද්ද කියලා. හරිද? ඒ නිසා කිසිම විදිහකින් ඔය පේපර් එක මට වෙනවා කියන එක ලැජ්ජ වෙන්න ඕන කාරණාවක්වත් බය වෙන්න ඕන කාරණාවක්වත් නෙවෙයි. හරි? ඒ නිසා මට එවන්න. පේපර් එක කරත් නැතත් කමන්නේ. කරගන්න බැරි වුණාට කමන්නේ. මට ආන්සර් ෂිට් ටික මම කියා දෙන්නේ මම එහන්න. හරි? Okay, then we can complete today's lesson. Alright. Tell me, what about your idea? If you got all the things, please raise your hand. मैं ඔක්කොම තේරෙන්න මට උත්සාහ. අද කරපු දේවල්. Thank you. Okay. Then we can complete today's lesson. We can complete today's lesson. Again. Please send your answer sheets. Please send your answer sheets because I need to mark them before the next class පොතේ. ඊළඟ ක්ලාස් එකට කලින් මට ඒක මාක් කරගන්න ඕනේ. එහෙම නැත්නම් ඉතින් ආයෙ ඊළඟ ක්ලාස් එකේදී මම ඒක ඩිස්කස් කරලා තේරුම් ගන්න තියෙනවා ඒක. And okay. Then we can complete today's class everyone. Good night. Bye bye පොතේ.
Good night, sir.
Good night, Good night, please.